This LOS is explain the money creation process. First, we're going to look at money measurements. This slide is going to show the United States in the Eurozone, and the next slide will show Japan in the UK. So in the US Federal Reserve produces two measures of money. The first is M1, which comprises notes and coins in circulation, travelers' checks of non-bank issuers, demand deposits at commercial banks, plus other deposits on which checks can be written. M2 is the broadest measure of money currently produced by the Federal Reserve and includes M1 plus savings and money market deposits, time deposit accounts of less than $100,000, plus other balances in retail, money market, and mutual funds. When we move to the Eurozone, the European Central Bank produces three measures of Euro area money supply. The narrowest is M1. M1 comprises notes and coins in circulation, plus all overnight deposits. M2 is a broader definition of Euro area money that includes M1, of course, plus deposits redeemable with notice up to 3 months and deposits with maturity up to 2 years. Finally, the Euro area's broadest definition of money is M3, which includes M2, of course, plus repurchase agreements, money market fund units, and debt securities with up to 2 years maturity. Moving on to Japan, the Bank of Japan calculates three measures of money. M1 is the narrowest measure and consists of cash, currency in circulation. M2 incorporates M1, but also includes certificates of deposits. The broadest measure, M3, incorporates M2, plus deposits held at post offices, plus other savings and deposits with financial institutions. There is also a broad measure of liquidity that encompasses M3, as well as a range of other liquid assets, such as government bonds and commercial paper. Finally, looking at money measures in the United Kingdom, the UK produces a set of four measures, including money stock. M0 is the narrowest measure and comprises notes and coins held outside the Bank of England, plus bankers' deposits at the Bank of England. M2 includes M0, plus effectively all retail bank deposits. M4 includes M2, plus wholesale bank and building society deposits, and also certificates of deposit. Finally, the Bank of England produces another measure called M3H, which is a measure created to be comparable with money definitions in the EU. M3H includes M4 plus UK residents and corporations, foreign currency deposits in banks and building societies. Now, it's fairly important to understand, I'm not sure if you need to memorize all that exactly, but just definitely be aware there can be some questions based on the definitions M1, M2, or compare and contrast a little bit between the US, UK, Japan, and the Euro area. The reserve requirement is the percentage of deposited funds that a bank must keep in reserve, that is, not lend out. The amount of money in the banking system is a function of the reserve requirement. The higher the reserve requirement, the less funds available to lend. The lower the reserve requirement, the more funds available to lend. The effect of the reserve requirement on the money supply is summarized with the money multiplier. And so the money multiplier is easy to understand. It's just 1 divided by the reserve requirement. So if the reserve requirement is 5%, the money multiplier is 20 times. If the reserve requirement is 10%, the money multiplier is 10 times. So you can see the higher the reserve requirement, the less funds available to lend, because the money multiplier at 10% is 10 times, where at 5%, the money multiplier is 20 times. So the lower the reserve requirement, the more funds available to lend. So just a quick little practice question to check our understanding. If the reserve requirement for banks in an economy is 5%, how much money could be created with the deposit of an additional £100 into a deposit account? A, £500, B, £1,900, or C, £2,000? So the correct answer is C. This is a pretty easy one. Remember, the money multiplier is just 1 divided by the reserve requirement. So in this case, they've given you the additional £100 into a deposit account. So it's just £100 times 1 divided by 0.05, and that's going to give you £2,000. So recall, with the reserve requirement being 5%, the money multiplier is 20. So So just a couple more definitions on this slide. Money stock includes coins and currency in circulation, plus deposits in banks and other financial institutions, which can be used to make purchases of goods and services. Narrow money includes notes and coins in circulation, plus highly liquid deposits. Broad money includes narrow money, plus all liquid assets that can be used to make purchases. Quick and easy practice question to check your understanding. As the reserve requirement increases, the money multiplier A increases, B decreases, or C remains the same. Okay, that should be an easy question. As the reserve requirement increases, the money multiplier decreases. There is an inverse relationship between the money multiplier and the reserve requirement. The money multiplier is equal to 1 divided by the reserve requirement, which we've got here. So again, just do it. Sometimes, if you haven't seen this question in a long time, don't do everything in your head. If you did 1 divided by the 10%, that's going to be 10 times in terms of the money multiplier. And if it was 1 divided by the 5%, it would be 20 times. So you can see as the reserve requirement increases, the money from 5% to 10%, the money multiplier decreases. So again, I know this is an easy question. You probably can do that one in your head. You're familiar with the numerator and denominator, but it's just an example of sometimes when you've got a multiple choice question, especially when they're giving it in the twisting the language, making the least likely or the most likely, looking for the negative, then just do the calculation very quickly, check and double check and recheck exactly how the question is being phrased, okay? Easy question. And we'll just finish this LOS with one last practice question, as we often do. Which is the most accurate statement regarding the demand for money? A, precautionary money is directly related to GDP. B, transactions money demand is inversely related to returns on bonds. Or C, speculative demand is inversely related to the perceived risk of other assets. The correct answer is A. Precautionary money demand is directly related to GDP. Precautionary money balances are held to provide a buffer against unforeseen events that might require money. Precautionary balances tend to rise with the volume and value of transactions in the economy and therefore rise with GDP. Okay, I wanted to finish with that question just to bring up an important point. You can see that in the previous LOS in the slide, we talked about the demand for money, and we gave the 3 basic motives for holding money: transactions related, precautionary, and speculative, and that was meant to be a review. But sometimes you need to, if you get a question wrong, like for example, if you got that last practice question wrong, you didn't know it, then I always say go back to the text and find out where it was, and then read it, and then you'll see, oh, wait a minute, there's a couple of points that I missed. I'm going to add that to the cue card that I'm making, or I'm going to add a couple of extra notes. So on that one, we may not have had the right answer, that money balances that are held to finance transactions are referred to as transactions money balances. The size of transaction balances will tend to increase with the average value of transactions in an economy. Generally speaking, as GDP grows over time, transaction balances will also grow. However, the ratio of transactions to GDP remains fairly stable over time. So again, that was talking about transactions related. When we get into the precautionary, it said precautionary balances are held to provide a buffer against unforeseen events that might require money. These balances will tend to be larger for individuals or organizations that enter into a high level of transactions over time. In other words, a precautionary buffer of $100 for a company that regularly enters in transactions worth millions of dollars might be considered rather small. Okay, but the important thing here is that you can see that the last sentence is that balances will also tend to rise with the volume and value of transactions in the economy, and therefore GDP as well. So again, that last little practice question, I liked it because it was a little bit tricky, and it forces you to go back to the text and see that precautionary money balances are tied to GDP. So that's always my study advice and study tip, is when you get a question wrong, go back to the curriculum, find where it was, and quite often you'll see it's right there in the paragraph, or it was in a blue box example, okay? And that's the last for this LOS. Thank you.